welcome. There's one more seat up here if you're looking for one. Great. Thanks so much for coming. I'm Shelley Rosenblum, Curator of Academic Programs here at the Belkin. I'm going to keep these remarks brief. Hi, Jane. Thank you. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded homelands of the Musqueam people. As a cultural institution situated within a university, universities always already entangled in colonial knowledge production and dispossession, we commit to learning, listening, unlearning, acting, and being in relationship to Indigenous communities and cultural life. Thank you for joining us today for the lecture series, What a Seed Does, or Tending to Paradise, however you see it, creating an ongoing conversation throughout this exhibition, The Willful Plot, an exhibition which interrogates the potential of the garden. We invite landscape architects and scholars who think beyond the garden proper, articulating the overlapping and sometimes contradictory threads of human and institutional agency, processes and narratives that shape the landscapes in the Anthropocene. In Funny Weather, Art in an Emergency, a collection of meditations on art, activism, and our search for meaning, Olivia Lang profiles Derek Jarman, whose 1990 film, The Garden, showing in the next room. The gardener digs in another time, without past or future, beginning or end. Here is the Amen beyond the prayer, Derek Jarman wrote, as he grieved his dying friends, faced his own death, and contemplated art, mortality, and resistance, while planting a garden between an old lighthouse and a new nuclear plant on a barren shingled shore. Lang's essay on Jarman, titled Paradise, begins with a question of whether gardening is a form of art and ends with a question of whether art is a form of resistance. For her, one must somehow reconcile two temporal models, linear time, chronos, how we plot the vector of progress, and cyclical time, or kairos, which is the time of gardens, and she intimates the time of societies. Therein lies the paradox. How do we practice resistance if time is the substance we are made of, and yet we live suspended between these two parallel visions of time as we try to build paradise? She asks, is art resistance? Can you plant a garden to stop war? It depends how you think about time. It depends what you think its seed does if it's tossed into fertile soil. But it seems to me that whatever else you do, it's worth tending to paradise, however you define it and wherever it arises. So I'd like to welcome you, Jane Wolff. Thank you so much for coming. Jane is professor at the John H. Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape and Design at the University of Toronto, and the 2022 recipient of the Margulies Design for Living Prize, which also brings her here throughout the year. Wolff's current research, included in the 2022 Toronto Biennial of Art, uses Toronto's metropolitan landscape as a laboratory to develop and decolonize landscape observation methods. Her latest book, Bay Lexicon, is a field guide that defines place-based language for the changing edge of San Francisco Bay. Previous publications include the edited volume Landscape Citizenship, the web resource Gutter to Gulf, Delta Primer, a field guide to the California Delta, and many essays. Her work has been widely exhibited and supported by many grants, SHRC, Grant Foundation, Fulbright. Thank you so much for being here with us. Please join me in a warm welcome.
Well, actually, it's I who thank you, Shelley, for the invitation. Thanks to all of you for coming today. I have to say that it hadn't dawned on me that that there would be so many of you, and I wanted to say also that it's really been a pleasure to embark on conversations with colleagues at SALA, with Sarah Jacobs, Chris McDonald, YTO, and with Ron Kellett, Tamara Ross, Emma Fennell, and with students whose names I'm just getting to know, but I see some of your faces from yesterday. So it's just been a pleasure to get to know you. And I thought maybe I'll sit down. Is that okay? All right.
Just a little louder.
Yes, a little louder. How's that? Yeah, okay, good. So really, thanks to all of you, and thanks so much for the invitation to be part of a conversation about this extremely interesting exhibition about gardens. And I started thinking about gardens, and I started thinking about the verb to garden, which means to cultivate, which means to grow or to tend or to raise, or to encourage or foster, or to seek the acquaintance of, to make friends. And I started to think about observing as a kind of gardening, because it has to do with cultivating awareness and understanding and belonging and I think agency. And so I thought maybe that's what we could talk about today together. And I guess I wanted to also put out the idea that observing is an active practice and an activist practice, as we see that gardening can also be from the content in this exhibition. And the reason I say that it's an active practice and an activist practice, is that I think it's an important step toward collective discussion about the future of places we care about, places that are contested, places that are complicated, places that are uncertain. So I get to have the pleasure, as Shelley said, of working over the coming months with colleagues and students at Sala, I think also with an amazing crowd of people I've encountered at the Belkin just over the last 24 hours. And I hope maybe even with some of you on a project that's about observing a place you know that I don't know. I'm just beginning to get to know a tiny bit. Kids Pool and Kids Beach, a place that's really subject to change. And so at the kind invitation of Ron and with the support of the Margulies Prize, we're gonna make an observing space in May at KITS. And yeah, so we'll work on an observing space for KITS Pool and KITS Beach that will be open in May. And I thought when Shelley and I were talking about today that this conversation could be a part of that adventure, a part of finding out what people think about KITS, what they care about KITS, what they wonder about KITS. And if you're free later in the afternoon, we're actually going to take a walk over there from 3 to 4, and it would be lovely if anybody wants to join. So in the meantime, it seemed like it would be nice to spend this hour talking about some observing projects that I've worked on, and again, thanks to the kindness of Shelley and Michael and Jay and Joe, all this, most of this stuff kind of appeared out of a hat since yesterday afternoon, got reprinted. So we could talk about that stuff, and really what I would love most is to talk with you about KITS and about your observation of KITS. So that's everything that's on my note card, and from here I think it's it's open season. And except yesterday when I was talking with Chris McDonald and the students, people had these amazing camera obscuras that they had built. Did anybody bring one? You did? Great. Will you put it on the table? Yeah. Oh, 2. Okay, and you have to remind me your names. I'm sorry.
Dustin.
Pardon me?
Dustin.
Dustin, okay. Here, not under.
Oh.
On.
No room.
There is room. We can always make more room. So, Shelley, what's a good way to...
Can you start by talking us through some case studies and observation to help us think about your project later, or 2 in particular?
Yes. Yeah, okay, so I brought some stuff that we can pass around. And this heap of stuff has, has all to do with a sustained collaboration with a science museum in San Francisco called the Exploratorium. And about 15 years ago, two curators from the Exploratorium, Susan Schwarzenberg and Pete Richards, approached me because they were interested in expanding the museum's purview from the lab sciences into the environment. And we started thinking, how could you do that? And borrowing shamelessly from history, we decided to take inspiration from Patrick Geddes' observatory in Edinburgh and to think about the idea of an observatory for San Francisco Bay. And so one of the things that struck me when we went to see the Exploratorium's future building, its current building, but at that time in the future, was that you could imagine a very minimal observatory that consisted only of a window and a dictionary so that you could see a landscape, and so you had a set of terms to help you understand what it was that you were looking at. And the idea really was that language is a fundamental tool for perception because it's very hard to recognize what we can't name, and we tend to have names for things that we value, but we don't always understand those names in the same way. Shelley and I were just talking about this morning, that part of what I think is an important project for collective conversation about the future of complicated landscapes is the development of a shared vocabulary to discuss them with. So this was the very first little beginning of this project that took a long, long time, like 15 years, Bay Lexicon. And it started with a walk along the shoreline. I'll just pass this stuff around. A walk along the shoreline, and a question about two words that we mostly think we know, land and water, and an examination of what those words meant at 6 stopping points along the bay's shore. That's where it started. And the idea was that people could take these little flashcards and they could hold them up where they were standing and see the stuff that they were looking at, and just ask themselves, well, what does that mean? And maybe, can we just send stuff around? Is that
Yeah.
Okay. So that early study turned into an installation in the museum, which had very much more elaborate and substantial flashcards that looked not only at land and water, but that looked at a series of sites on an 11-mile walk along the shoreline, and said, what are those places? What are their components? And what might they mean? And again, it was in a way a really simple idea. Most of the time, the installation lives inside the space that became the Bay Observatory. Sometimes it goes outside in a heavy cart. And again, you can just look, for instance, at a drawing, an annotated drawing about the bridge while you're looking at the bridge, and ask yourself what that means. So that was its second incarnation. And then its third incarnation was this, a book that's an attempt to answer a deceptively simple question. A question, I'll show you, where is, if we look at the map, where is the edge of the bay? Where is the edge of the bay? It looks like a line, and it's not a line. And the book includes those drawings from the field guide that was made up by the museum installation, but it also includes a lexicon, because it turns out that looking closely at the edge of the bay calls into question the meanings of a lot of words we use all the time, words we think we know, land and water, but also defense or commerce or infrastructure or time or play or work. So the front half of the book is a lexicon that looks at what those words mean in this place.
and then the back half is the field guide that the museum drawings make up. And maybe I'll send this one that way. So from that long experience, I developed a really amazing relationship with Susan Schwarzenberg, who is one of the universe's gifts to my to my little cosmology. And Susan had been the curator of this observatory where Bay Lexicon lived, right in the middle. And she and I got invited to think about bringing some of those ideas to Toronto. And that happened in a couple of stages. And again, I have some hot off the press reprints of documents we made in 2019 about a pop-up field station along the shoreline of Toronto. It was up for a week. It included a collection of maps and drawings and stuff to look at. But most importantly, it centered on a walk along the shore with people who knew a lot about that place in different ways. Grandmother Kim Wheatley, who's an Anishinaabe water walker, James Roche, who's a landscape architect who was involved in many of the public space projects along the reconstructed waterfront that's in progress right now. Sandy Smith, who's an entomologist and urban forester. And after the walk, we all went back to the observatory and we had a conversation, which is, you can see, is something that's really on my mind as a part of a process of observation. And that's documented here. Should I give this to you? Thank you. And because of that adventure, because we had such an interesting time, the biennial invited us to come back in 2022 and make a project called Toronto Landscape Observatory. And thanks to the generous funding of funding by Sharp, we had a year to develop the space and a series of programs and a series of tools, observing tools that went inside the space, which was up for 6 weeks this past spring in May and into June of 2022. And there were a lot of different kinds of projects. I was able to bring some tools, or we were able to reprint some tools. Alexander Moyle, who is an environmental sculptor, made these amazing calipers and clay tablets that allowed people to measure and calculate the proportions of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen embedded in a leaf and then released on combustion. So this is a tablet showing the measurements, and again, this stuff can all travel around the room. And if I can get them open. These are those beautiful calipers that made the scores on the tablet. So why don't we send these around too? Who wants to start? Maybe somebody in the middle. How about you? This one. Okay. So that was a project. We had Aaron Hernandez made a beautiful atlas of the place we were in Toronto, in a former industrial area that's being transformed very radically by development. And the atlas showed how policy had been manifest in the physical environment. Jennifer Wemmelwans worked with grandmother Jacques Lavallee to make an AR project of teaching about Wendigo and ice, because where we were located was right near where the ice began to retreat when the glaciers melted and the Iroquois was formed. James Bird led a conversation about language and landscape and about how his language, the Dene language, shapes his connection to place. Susan and I took a walk with our mobile observatory cart, which is documented in this thing. Here, let's give this to John. that's a catalog of the whole thing. We made, as part of the biennial mobile arts curriculum, a little sort of broadside called How to Take a Walk. And this one, has a set of questions to think about for a person on her feet or his feet. Yeah, louder, here. Want to have that? And then we had a couple of projects that took the form of walks, and the walks had instructions on broadsides. One was a listening walk by Sherry Lee and Emily McCallum. One was a walk to greet plants by Lorraine Johnson, who's a native plants specialist in Southern Ontario. You have any? So, yeah, it's like, I don't know, it's more fun to look at stuff, right? And then because I love words and I also love to draw, I started working on a kind of sketch lexicon to ask about words that came up through what people were doing, like what is a leaf? And it turns out, I understand now from Alex Moyle, that a leaf is a place where light turns into food. What does it mean to greet somebody? Lorraine showed us how greeting is about saluting beings, human or more than human, as friends. Some of the entries were more just about what was out there, like what's a path? A path is a way made by walking. What's a ridge? You know, it's a topographic feature in a landscape, a big one, but it can also be a small one, like the ridge on the path that keeps the path dry on a rainy day. What was really interesting also was that people who came to the programs and came to the installation made things. Made drawings that we put on the wall. They collected artifacts of interesting stuff they found in the neighborhood, and we put those in. And so it turned out that what was most fun, I think, and illuminating about the whole experience was that over the course of 6 weeks, we had a sustained conversation with people. Sometimes people came only once, but often they came back and they came back and they came back. And so we made a conversation about that place. That was really fun. There's one other thing that, because of Michael's amazing talents, we were able to reconstitute a different kind of observing tool. It's a field guide that my students made just this fall about our Cardo and Decumanus at the University of Toronto, where I teach, an important street called Spadina or Ispadina, which is a ridge running from the current shore of Lake Ontario to the ancient shoreline of Lake Iroquois, the private lake, and then College Street running between two of the buried streams that dissect our glaciated plain, Garrison Creek and Tallow Creek. And so they measured, they walked the sites, they measured with their bodies, they made drawings in the field that they elaborated digitally, and then together they made a field guide. So this is another kind of observing tool. And I guess I'm showing you all this stuff because, well, really as an invitation to think about tools that you might want to make or you might want to use at a place like KITS. And then I think, Dustin, and I've forgotten your name, and Anna. Maybe Dustin and Anna would tell you about the camera obscuras that they made. Will you do that? Will you come and show how they work and maybe we'll pass them around? I guess what all of this adds up to is finding ways to make the things we think we know seem just unfamiliar enough that we can ask ourselves about their possibilities. And I think these two tools do it so beautifully. So will you explain how they work?
So this one I think is a bit more traditional. Dustin's is a little bit more modern.
I'm just going to keep reminding everyone. Volume.
Yes, yes, of course.
You can project, thank you.
So camera obscura, pretty much the light comes through. We used like a bit of a magnifying lens to help like concentrate the light that comes through. And in this one, we have a mirror that's at a 45-degree angle, and the light comes up onto a piece of tracing paper that is projected onto the paper. And when you look through, in this one, it creates an inverted image, but it kind of gives an ephemeral quality to the things that you see around you. And it's quite nice. The way that we did it here is that we also have this piece that goes up and down, so you can change the zoom quality and then also the focal point.
So amazing.
Yeah, and we chose to do like a landscape thing because we're actually doing work at the site of Kids Pool, and so we kind of wanted to keep the landscape point of view for like the view of Vancouver and the ocean. And I believe that's everything.
And this going to come on our walk?
Yes, of course, of course.
Okay, so maybe we can try it out in the gallery, but then it's a powerful incentive to come on the walk. And this is amazing.
Yes,
right?
please.
Yes. Okay, and should we send
Should
it
I
around?
pass it down? Yeah, sure.
Let's send it around right
Oh yes,
now.
I also didn't, so you look down into it, and then you can move it up and down depending on which one gives you the best focus.
Are you comfortable with that?
Of course, yes, please.
Okay, and tell us about this one.
Yeah, so this one I think is like a bit more of like the obscure side of it than that one. So this is actually using two different vantage points, and so it's taking the same kind of idea of taking the image and inverting it, but it's doing it twice and then composing it into one image. It's designed to be used with your phone. The idea is as your phone sits in here, it's taking, this is kind of the diagram. The light is coming in and it's being reflected onto a screen, and then where you have a series of mirrors that kind of project it up, so when you're looking from the vantage point, you can see both images. Yeah, I don't know if there's much more. We don't have any focus on it by any means, but the idea is just kind of compose some weird image. The idea with the second slot was so that you could have essentially two phones in there, and as you're walking, almost take a video of like, what is the true sight as you're walking past it, opposed to like this kind of obscure, different vantage point as you're walking through.
Can we give this to people to play with?
Definitely.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you'll see much in here. It needs quite a bit of light to actually used.
Thank you.
No worries. No.
The question is, did you use photo paper in either of them?
We wanted to get some, but we couldn't find it. Like, I think the darkroom in the photography club right now is currently like low on chemicals, so I think it's quite hard. So, but we did want to get some paper, so I hope that we get them in the next week or so. Yeah, but it's a good idea.
That's why we use the phones. As you match your phones, you can kind of capture that image still.
So I feel like that's way more than enough talking from me. And I wonder if I could ask you to talk about kids, or about observing, or about gardening, or about activism, or all of the above. Who loves Kids Pool? Oh yeah, here we are.
Oh,
What's
I
your
have not
name?
been to Kids Pool. My name is Evan. I'm not a landscape architecture student, so I don't know if I know how to speak about this work at all. But I'm a library in information sciences, and what you speak about like the person not even knowing the language is like what we speak about a lot in our studies of. We usually look at it from the point of view of a librarian or like a research assistant. So it's like sometimes our patrons or whoever's looking to us for help doesn't even have the language, right, to ask us what they need. And there's like, I'm sure you know like information sciences, but it just reminded me a lot of the language that they use too, of like unknown needs, right? They have like a lot of cool breakdowns. And so, yeah, I just wanted to hear that. And I just met some kids about 5 months ago. So,
Wow.
I was like, oh, how perfect. So I lived in a rural area in Massachusetts for like 5 years. So I'm like, oh, it's so urban. So I'm interested to see how, I don't really know the language and how to talk about this, but I've noticed that it's urban. Yeah.
That's so interesting about not even knowing what we're searching for, right?
Yeah.
That sounds like what you're saying.
Totally. So like controlled vocabularies, right? So like we create that, like thesauruses or like so on. And yeah, no, it's like, it's so true. There's a lot of overlapping in a good way.
Okay, well, maybe we can sign you up. What else? Anybody swim in kids' pool? I'm dying to swim in kids' pool. You do? What's that like?
Long. It's a really long leg.
How many lengths do you do? It's like 130 meters, right?
Yeah, thereabouts. Yeah. There also aren't lines on the bottom. So, yeah.
Going for a ceiling for reference.
Was Kids Pool damaged last year or something happened?
I think so, from the tides. Yeah.
As I understand it, and I know there are people in the room who know a lot more about this than I do, so I hope you'll just add and absolutely correct me if I'm misunderstanding things. But the seawall that contains the pool is unstable, and the king tides that occurred last January, I think, and are expected to occur soon again, breached that wall. So when I was there on Monday, there are these big yellow, orange inflatable booms that are meant to stop flooding because it's anticipated that it's going to come into the pool. And the understanding I have is that there's a question: does it make sense to repair it? Does it make sense to rebuild it? Does it make sense to let it go? And the sense I have, and again, you know a lot more than I do, so I hope you'll add and refine and correct. The sense I have is that it's a very beloved place, and it's complicated to come to terms with the idea that it might not be able to keep being the way that it has been. Is that right?
That sounds pretty good. The thing I was thinking about on the back side of Kids Pool is a theater, and that it's painted the same color as the bottom of the pool, or a very close shade. So I found that relationship funny. And you look into the theater, and there's also a viewing platform for people to watch the swimmers, and I always like that feature.
The pool itself is a kind of theater,
yeah.
Right? Wow. Were you going to say something? That person in the sort of purpley gray sweater? No? You? Yeah.
No,
you
I
look
love
like
this
you're
pool.
in the pool. But you like the pool? Do you swim there?
I don't do the legs, but I swim with my son. So as he's gotten older, he's better. But there's so many elements of Kids Pool, from the hardcore swimmers to the little gradual entry to the deep end where you can jump in off the side and watch the swimmers go by. It is a beloved place. When you said that really struck it. And it also plays into the network of the Vancouver outdoor swimming pools, which have so much history. Because another pool we go to is New Brighton Pool, down where in the industrial part of Vancouver on the waterfront. Different because it's set back, but it is one of the Vancouver's long-standing outdoor pools. And very similar in that design in that era.
What's the interesting history with Vancouver outdoor pools?
I just feel like they've been there forever, and I guess my mom grew up near New Brighton, and so she went to New Brighton Pool and walked down there, and I went to Kids Pool, and now I'm taking my son to New Brighton Pool and Kids Pool, and they're falling apart. Yeah. And also the pool down at Second Beach, yeah.
Which is amazing.
Yeah, and another one.
Swimming so close to the ocean.
Yeah.
In a pool.
Yeah, they're just just magical spots that you go on holidays and go elsewhere, and then you come back home and you're like, we have these amazing pools here in Vancouver.
It's so interesting to see a swimming pool at the water's edge. I was thinking about that too, that there's something kind of remarkable about a piece of water that's a little bit tame right at the edge of a piece of water that's not in any way tame, and that seems less and less tame as the climate emergency gets worse, like every 15 or 20 minutes. I think that's such an interesting juxtaposition, I guess we could say. It's kind of amazing. And we don't, in Toronto, we don't really have that. It's not a thing.
If I remember correctly, I don't know if Kids Pool was the same, but Second Beach Pool, and there used to be a pool at Lumberman's Ark on the other side of Stanley Park, were previously tide-fed pools. So as you said, the water would come in, but still be calm. Before it was like made into a sort of separate system at the water's edge.
Huh, wow. That must have been really beautiful.
Long before my time. But
So that really interests me as well. If you look at old pictures, of course, there was this big, beautiful tidal pool there, and what it means now, thinking about how the history's defined itself over the last 100 years or so, what it meant to put this big built pool there and how it's being reclaimed now. The weather, and to stay with this idea of observation as activism, to really try to think what a methodology for that would be. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your selection of that site for your project here.
Well, it really wasn't. It really wasn't my selection. What happened was, and I think this is an interesting story because I can't be emphatic enough about the fact that this is your place, this is not my place. I feel like I just come here because of these generous invitations. You know, I'm a visitor, I'm a guest. What happened was that Ron said that with the Marleys they were interested in some kind of sustained engagement over the course of a year, and I said, great, what if we make an observatory about some place in Vancouver that's important and that's changing, and so I think Ron and Emma and Tam all thought hard and suggested Kids Pool, and once they suggested it, it just seemed like such an amazing place because it poses so many questions. I mean, one thing we did in October when I came here was to take a first walk, and some of the people who came are people with deep knowledge of that part of the city. Jonna Sparrow, who's a Musqueam elder, talked with us about her grandfather who would take her fishing there, and who told her, about life on the shoreline before Vancouver was the way Vancouver is now. I think she's about 60, so we could figure out how old her grandfather is. But within a couple of generations, there's a really living memory of that place. Amir Talagani, who's a civil engineer, told us about all the water flows above ground and below ground that are coming to the beach, and about the engineering that underlies that part of the city. Chris Harley, who's a marine biologist here at UBC, told us about tidal variation and what it means for the marine life along the shore. I saw him the other day again, and he told me about these amazing, I guess you would call them tiles. They're cast concrete structures that have different sort of surfaces and apertures, and that could be used together to make a kind of living experiment about what would flourish where in a wall that was conceived not as a line, but actually as a place. So anyway, KITS, I'm along for the fun at KITS, and I think really what I hope I can offer here is some experience in thinking about ways of observing and ways of coming together, and tools that might be useful to you and to other people who care about this place, who belong to this place. So it's so really I think I just would love to know more about what you know. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your talk and your work.
And just a few things came to mind while you were speaking. So one is that there's a very strong tradition in Vancouver of sound walks. Can you hear me? Gosh, the ceiling's so high. So there's a strong tradition in Vancouver of sound walks, in fact. And one of the, I think the founder of sound walks is Hildegard Westerkamp. I don't know if you've met her yet, but yeah.
I met her in Toronto, actually.
Oh,
yeah,
wonderful. So that would be really good. And when I was thinking about the Kit speech, I have to share a memory, and that is that it was a memory of when I was having a surreptitious beer on the beach, and who wandered over, but you know, the boys in blue. So there's an interesting discourse going on in the city around where you can drink in parks and on beaches. And it seems to slip and slide a bit, you know, like we drinkers, I suppose, but that's a pretty lively discourse that's going on. A little bit of insider knowledge. Yeah. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is that I'm not sure what the relationship is between the Musqueam Nation and Kits Beach, but I know that, well, all along that coastline is, of course, Musqueam. So I guess just to flag the relationship is absolutely crucial and nodal, and there must be another name. Maybe one thing that could come out of that is maybe creating a space for there to be a name, or maybe even Kitsilano, of course, is Katsalano, who is you know, very important to this area. So maybe a project which would help people to learn Hunkaminam's pronunciation of that, because we do, you know, just call it Kit speech as though it could be kind of anywhere, you know.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if it is Musqueam. Isn't that Squamish? I mean, I would have thought. I know that, you know, I mean, in terms of, I mean, that's contentious too.
Right.
Jane is interested in contested things, and but my understanding is that, well, for one, that the head of Kitts Point and where the Museum of Vancouver is, that was the Squamish Reserve, which is now reduced to our the Sinakwa project, which is beyond the extent of your study area, I think, but is the kind of legacy, I think, of reconciliation as it relates to how land is valued for the urban nations of the MST. And I would be very surprised if that was not a Squamish piece of ground. Certainly they would claim it. And you know, there's obvious evidence. So you mentioned a Musqueam elder or knowledge holder. I would definitely go looking for some Squamish knowledge.
Yeah.
If I could throw 2 bits in about that. And of course, I always end up talking behind the camera. But it was actually a shared area used for fishing. When a settlement was negotiated for the expropriation of Kitsilano 6 Reserve by the Canadian military, which happened in World War I, the monies that were paid out to Musqueam, Squamish, and Sable. And they're still contesting exactly what percentages of that money will be distributed to each nation. So it was never clearly any one nation's territory. We think in contemporary times we think of borders as these strictly delineated things, but that's really only something that's happened in the last 100 years, and not just here, but globally, like, you know, areas of influence and places that were administered by more than one administration. The area where that development is going on is actually an area that was never expropriated and remained part of the original reserve. It was just this strange corner of land that was never part of the city of Vancouver and remained and was never expropriated by the Canadian military for defense purposes. It was never turned into a park. It was never anything. So it's an interesting situation that's going on here because it's outside of the city's jurisdiction. And it's, in itself is a huge, interesting thing to look more closely at.
It's so important, and I thank you both for helping me to understand a part of the world that's really new to me. And I think also that, John, if you or if anyone here has ideas about people we should be talking to, it would be fantastic to have their names, and we would absolutely follow up. That would be a huge gift to this undertaking.
There was a hand here.
I want to comment, like I haven't used the pool personally ever, but I've used the backside of the pool, so we've commented on that theater area.
Yeah.
And there's been swing dancing there every Thursday night in the summertime for the past 25 years or so, except for during COVID. It's come back this past summer, and then there's also fusion dancing occasionally on Tuesdays during the summer when it's warmer. And so it's a very nice, like it's fond memories of a space for me. Going there in the summertime, socializing with people, having fun dancing.
Wow, what a beautiful image you conjured. It's amazing. Thank you. What else?
There's a group in the city that does urban action through poetry or placemaking through poetry, and that seems like a nice way to kind of collectively observe.
Wow. Vancouver is cool, isn't it? I'm starting to, I can't say realize how cool it is, but I'm starting to have a sense that it's really cool. Just at the very beginning of that measurement. What else?
You may be aware of it, but there's a map that was, I think it's a recording of Catalano himself that is in the city archives. I have a printout of it in the car, but you can't read the place names, it's too small, and you don't, anyway, it's available. And,
wow.
I don't know about the traditional names at Kid speech, what they are, but it's online.
Great.
There's that.
Okay, great. We'll look for it. What else? Yeah.
Yeah, also I would say that the area being a shared place to fish by our First Nations, that there's also, streams that were buried and destroyed and all of that, and that becomes a really important part of the entire city and the waterways that are surrounding it. So I think that's like a really important point of research, rather than just think about a pool as a place for human colonist pleasure, if I may be so bold. I think it's important to think of what's been buried and is not reclaimable, actually. I did a project in False Creek where it was a 24/7, 3-year live documentary of the underwater life of whatever was left there of False Creek. And we looked into research about the possibility of actually bringing some of those streams back, but the pollution had been so incredible throughout the logging industries and all the other industries that colonized the area that those streams cannot be brought back. So it's an important thing to think about when we think about, the pleasure of a pool and what's the future and,
You're so right that the shoreline is not a line. The shoreline goes all the way to the top of the watershed, if you think about it in a certain way, right? It's such a great point. Are the sewers here combined sewers? Is that part of the pollution issue or no? Combined storm and sanitary sewers? Yeah.
Well, sure, but, previous to that from the 1800s to the present, there was industry.
Yeah.
Right?
Got it.
Logging, chemical, concrete, all kinds of things. So,
wow. Wow.
And that affected Kitsilano, or Catalano as much as it did False Creek, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll see the height renting out from the beach,
Uh-huh.
which is part of the combined sewer. Parts of the downtown peninsula always were separate, though. Rain, wastewater, were sanitary sewers, and just the rainwater were kept separate.
Oh, that's interesting.
But that was not continued. I think that actually probably, some of that predates. The downtown peninsula is a little bit strange in that regard. I'd have to look things up to get them. I've got a half memory of sort of how I looked at this at one point when I lived on downtown, and I'm realizing now that I've opened my mouth, I've forgotten almost everything.
Oh no, but that's such an important clue, and now I know where to find you, so I'll bother you. We'll bother you. What else? What should we look for? What people have been telling us what they know, what they find. What do you wonder? Yeah. Woo-hoo.
Well, I wanted to describe. I found in looking at a thrift store in Kits, I found this old piece of like bone china. And on it is a depiction of Kits pool or a showboat at Kitsilano at Kits Beach. And it's made in Japan, and I can't help but think that like these pieces of china are this like British colonial sort of way of representing things to be remembered. And I think it's just a peculiar relic from an earlier era where now I don't think we would really celebrate a public pool on a piece of dinnerware.
Yes, a public pool on stolen land on a piece of dinnerware. Right? It's a lot of there's a lot of layers there. Wow, that's interesting. What did you do with it?
I haven't found a home for it yet, but I'll find a way to bring it to you because it might be something that might be incorporated.
Maybe we could put it in the observatory in our artifacts collection. Do you think?
Yeah.
Okay.
So will the observatory be a physical structure?
Well, the observatory is going to be a place, and Emma and I are both kind of laughing because exactly where and what that's going to be, we don't know, but Tam is working really hard on figuring it out, and so we hope in the next few weeks we'll have a location, right?
For mine.
Yeah, I think so. I'm feeling optimistic about it.
I'm so sorry to do this, but I'm mindful that we said we'd stay within the hour, but people have to get back to class, so I don't want to keep you. For those of you who want to say you're invited to visit the exhibition and stay on the conversation, I'd just like to say, Jane, that the idea of denaturalizing what we take for granted is always an excellent way to observe whatever it is, and the invitation to do that with Kids Pool is one I think we'll all take up, and we really appreciate your visit. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Well, thank you all.